As you walk your land, you're going to start seeing more and more unique features of your property. I want to show you something interesting here. In front of me is pine, a high density pine. Looks like a lot of scrub. Behind me is pine, but over this side is poplars. Now you can see by the green leaves, you got poplars, you got a little bit of hardwood, but mostly pine. This center section at one time was an empty field. That's what it tells me. That's what the pines tell me. It was an empty field. These are not planted in nice rows. It was just allowed to recover. By the way, I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to inventory your land and develop a profile so you know how to best utilize your land to get the maximum value and sometimes cash flow out of the property. So we got a forest mulcher back here, and you can see ahead of us, we've got green leaves, but left to right, we've got dark pine areas. Now this is a pine grove that's on top of a hill, and by satellite, it looks like a very low pile. So the pine doesn't grow as tall as fast as the other trees around it. So if there's any sunlight, the hardwoods or the poplars or the different tulips and maples, those maples and stuff will get above the canopy. They'll get above the pines fast. Now, I have some maple, some tulips, some other stuff, but the majority of this is pine. So you see some green leaves in the top, but it's not as dominant as outside of this area. So what I ended up doing using a satellite image is I planned these trails around the pine area, and since the pine area was somewhat level, I chose the pine area as the home site. Now again, just because there's pine trees doesn't mean it's the most ideal place for the home site. There's a lot of other factors you have to consider as well as you know, elevation, soil types, all that kind of thing. But the pines are really easy to mow down, which allows me to clear up the space more to see it even more. And so again, on the map, we map it out. Those green marks, by the way, is the boundary for clearing this space out. So I only want him in this space. We'll still have pine in front, and that beautiful smell of fresh cut pine is all over the place. And we'll still have pine behind this, but on the sides, we'll still keep our hardwoods. Now, another factor, what we're looking for is the nuts and different types of food trees. So if I remove this pine, which has very little market value, and by the way, he's not cutting it all down, he is simply slashing through the small trees to clear out the underbrush. So the majority of the larger pines are going to stay there, and the additional sunlight will allow them to grow bigger. But we're planning on running goats and hogs on this property in the future. So I'm more interested in the acorns, the walnuts, different kinds of nut trees that grow in this particular area. And so what I'm looking for is where those trees are, taking pictures of the area or geotagging the area, and then when the sunlight gets into the forest and those trees start popping up, the little shoots, I can dig out those shoots and move them someplace where they'll be more beneficial. So there'll be these wide clearings in here, and then on the outside edges where I find nut trees, when the new nut trees sprout up, and I don't really have a good example, but when they sprout up, I will dig them out and I will move them to different locations. I'll also collect the nuts and start a tree nursery. So a lot of times they don't talk about it, but when you're doing a holistic land management, I'm probably going to propagate hundreds of trees, thousands maybe even of trees. I'm also going to buy in certain trees that are ideal for my habitat, and I want to plant those where they're appropriate. So when I'm opening this forest up, there will be contour lines marked out, and I'll be planting additional trees to replace the ones I cut down, but ultimately trees that have higher utility values, such as nut trees, because in 5 years or so, if they're dropping nuts that maybe they're not big enough for humans to eat, they're definitely good for our pigs or some other animal. So I've actually gone in other places, collected acorns, and then I can simply plant the acorns in a bed, or it's the forestry planters, and get those acorns growing and then bring them out here. Now, will I lose a lot of trees to the deer? Certainly will. I will certainly lose probably most of them to the deer. But then again, deer are part of the resources on the land that delivers additional value. Now there's a forest mulcher out there, so I'm not going to walk out this way. But again, see how the trees have more green out there? There's a majority trees with green leaves versus a majority of trees with pine. So the conifers versus the deciduous. Now, another thing that we do too, by putting it on a map, we're able to plan outside of being on site. You know, sometimes it rains, sometimes it's just not a good environment to be out here. Today is beautiful, by the way. But we plan on paper, then we can survey the land and mark our trails and mark, you know, our cut areas. And you can see a survey marker over here from the original trails. But we're not completely clearing the space, because here's what happens when you completely clear the space. When you completely clear the space, you're going to get a crosswind through the property. Now I can already feel the breeze picking up in here, which is fine. But if it's completely cleared off, you're going to have more wind coming across the property, and it changes the dynamic of the land. We want to focus on how do we get the most from the property, how do we create the most living organisms on the property that feed each other, and then finally, how do we put those resources into good use without depleting them. So I can forest mulch this area 1,000 times, and because I've never taken out any biomass, it's kind of like mowing your lawn. The only difference is I get wood shredded wood. The shredded wood falls on the ground, feeds the soil, new trees come up. We're creating abundance. But from a recreational standpoint, and you can see there's an old orange trail here that didn't get cut. That's fine, it's not a problem. We mark more trails than we cut. But with the soil biology improved, and what's literally like a mattress here, I'm actually feeding the earth. I'm feeding the soil, and I'm gonna get, of the trees that remain, I'm gonna get better, healthier trees. So maybe in 10, 15 years, maybe in 20 years, there'll be timber available on the property. But again, we mapped it out. See, if I'm looking through this way, I'm not touching anything out there. It's gonna stay scrub, but the majority of the scrub is hardwoods and more valuable trees. On this side of the path, I'm thinning it out. There'll still be pine trees there, but they'll be thin out. There'll be 10, 20 feet between a tree. Those trees can grow out the rest of the way, or if they're big enough and I do some timber framing, I can cut them down with a chainsaw and use them to timber frame. The soil composition will be different between an area that's heavy pine versus an area that is trees, hardwood trees. Now here's something interesting. This is something you got to remember. Why is it, so seeds are spread evenly over the soil. Nobody planted these trees. Why is it one side has more pine and the other side has more oaks and hardwoods? Well, there's a lot of complex reasons, but the main thing could be because it was an old field, whether they're cutting hay or they're having animals on it, but the depletion of nutrients, pine can grow in a less quality soil. So pine can grow in a soil that is actually somewhat depleted, where the oak trees need more minerals. Another factor could be is that on the other side of this, there's light, and the green leaf plants need more sunlight in order to grow than the conifers that they need sunlight, but they don't need as much sunlight. They'll get bushy at the top, where our oaks and such tend to not have any branches on the side of them. So again, here's maple, here's an oak, then here's our pines. So I want to leave you with the fact that we are not just randomly coming out here and doing stuff. We aren't getting an idea and then implementing it. We're getting an idea, testing it against the expression of the forest, and then trying to enhance the forest's expression by understanding its soil. If I'm going to build a house, I'm going to build it on the worst soil on the land. Now, again, it's still got to be in the right placement, the right solar aspect. But I'm gonna scrape off what topsoil there is And if you're digging a foundation, you want clay, you want hard rock soil. You don't want soil that's highly nutritious and loamy. I want the loamy soil for where I'm going to manage the animals so that I have a quick recovery of the forest, and where I'm going to have forest product such as future timber or nuts, berries, all kinds of things. I'm also looking for, I just saw a beer bottle in the woods here. I'm also looking for how humans have interacted with the property in the past, and that gives me an idea of where the best soil might be, where the worst soil might be. What areas should I keep? What areas should I thin out? What areas I might dig out and regrade? Like after this is done and I've taken the pine trees that I want, I might have somebody grade part of this as we get closer and closer to the home site. Amazing stuff, exciting stuff. If you got questions, ask it below. I'm Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead. I'll see you in the next video.